Welcome to A Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Peter Byrne. Welcome to Barra's Art and Design, Peter Byrne, and it's an absolute pleasure to have you on A Celtic State.
Same here, it's great to meet you.
We're going to be talking Celtic, of course, we're going to be talking film and everything else in between. Talk to me about your upbringing in Glasgow. What's your memories of being brought up in Glasgow?
Well, we're sitting here in the Barras, and I was brought up all around here. Stevenson Street, just back down there, is where my parents were living when I was born. I was born in the Rotten Row, just a matter of yards up there on the other side of the High Street. My first memories of life were at Glasgow Cross. I've just had lunch in the Coronation Cafe at Glasgow Cross. You could have thrown, if you had a boomerang, you could have, on a short throw, if you'd thrown it from my parents' flat round the corner into Abercrombie Street, it would have hit St Mary's.
Right.
And I was baptised there. So I arrogantly consider myself Celtic royalty, aristocracy, because you can claim that you were born in you were baptised in St Mary's, Carlton. So yeah, that was my formulation, and it remains what I am, I think, you know, because there are people who seem to want to escape from what they were, and I've never felt like that. And Celtic were always right at the centre of all of that. I'm always worried when I start to talk about Celtic in relation to where you come from. I'm going to start greeting because I get very emotional about it.
Yeah.
But it means so much to so many people. And Celtic have the best origin story in all sport, and it's an absolute bizarreness that it's not been turned into a film before now. But I'm jumping ahead a bit because the depth of my involvement with Celtic, I never had a choice. I was a Celtic fan in the womb.
Yeah.
And I was later educated by the Marists at St Mungo's, the Marists who ran St Mungo's. And they, of course, were the organisation that founded the Celtic. I mean, my spiritual formulation's got a bit different since then, I think. A bit wider, perhaps.
Yeah.
Or maybe a bit narrower. That's another thing. But you know, I still regard myself as a profound cultural Catholic, and I always will be. That's where I come from, and that's where I remain.
You know, when you're thinking about that intrinsic link, being baptised in the birthplace of Celtic. We were there a couple of years ago. We had the absolute pleasure of filming a wee part of our music video down there. We were raising funds for St Mary's. And there's a real energy about it. I want to talk to you throughout this chat about energy. Because we talk about atmosphere. What is atmosphere? What is ambience? And I think energy comes into that. There's a real energy down there at St Mary's. And the video that
You're getting quite quantum there. That's quite interesting.
Yeah, I think, you know, even I know just by looking at some of your previous interviews, you're interested in things like the supernatural, and, you know, energy comes into that as well. And I believe in the positive energy at Celtic Park. And I think that we suffered when the fans weren't in the stadium, for example.
Beyond a doubt.
It wasn't the only thing. There was loads of stuff going wrong, but I think that was a massive part of it. But St Mary's is a special place, a very special place. And even if we get a wee bit older and you start to analyse a religion, for example, and you don't feel the same way about it, maybe in your 40s, your 50s, your 60s and so on. I think that personally at my age, I'm so glad in my upbringing. It was by default. I mean, you don't choose these things. But when I'm looking back, it was almost as if I was to drop on this planet right now and someone says to me, look at the origin story of every football club in Scotland and what the club means, and choose one of them, I'd choose Celtic.
Of course.
I would choose
any club in the world, actually.
Yeah.
Pretty much any club in the world. And it was more than that for me, because the Marists, I think St Mungo's saved my life, because my mother died when I was relatively young. I was 13. Everyone had two parents at that time, you know. And I remember walking into the school playground in Duke Street, because it was the annex in Duke Street next to the Great Eastern Hotel. There was a school that had a sewer running through the playground, and the biggest model lodging house in Europe, you know, next to it. And we walked into the playground, and normally there's about 10 games of football going on at the same time, and all that. You know, everybody knows which game they're in, you know. It's always weird that they don't bump into each other. It's quantum. But everybody was standing around the edge of the playground, and I walked into this empty space. There's a scene in the movie, isn't there?
I know.
It was like, God, nobody wants to talk to me, you know. So I think St Mungo's really saved me, and I think that's a good part of the reason why I want to make this film, because I think there are people, religious people, who are wonderful. One of them just died recently, and there are ones who are not so wonderful. They're human beings. Some of them are not very nice human beings. But I owe so much to the Marists, and I think that this film, if we can get it made, should at least be in part a thank you to the Marists for what they did, not just for me, but for a lot of people in the East End of Glasgow.
You've touched on the film, and we'll talk about your career, your love of Celtic, and some of the experiences that you've had along the way, and also why there's a pair of breeks on this table. We might talk about that as well, Peter.
Got them off me already.
But Paradise, I mean, even just the title of it, it speaks volumes. And I do always say that the kind of genesis of this football club is so cinematic. I can almost visualise it. But this is a story that I probably heard about maybe 10, maybe longer, years ago, where this was being spoken about in some of the press. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, this could be a blockbuster of a movie. Have you been involved in this from the very, very early period, when this was being spoken about at Cannes, for example?
Well, the origin of it was the day after we beat Barcelona 2-1.
Right.
And I woke up that morning and thought, how many times have we stood in pubs talking about, wouldn't it be great to make the Celtic movie? And nobody, including myself, had ever really focused on that. And I thought, this has got to be the time to start it. So that's where the process began. It was an idea in my head, and I made contact with certain folk and managed to get some development money from both the British Film Institute and Screen Scotland, or what it was in its earlier name. Excuse me. And that was the sort of start of it. But it's been 13 years since then, you know. Yeah. And we are actually getting somewhere now. It was 9 or 10 years, not entirely wasted, but pretty much almost wasted by finding yourself, you were going up a cul-de-sac, up a blind alley, and stuff wasn't delivered, and people didn't, maybe deliver what they should have done, and people did deliver, and it wasn't very good, and so on. So it was a real sort of, we only keep going on this. My wife kept on saying, when are you going to chuck this? And I'm saying, I just can't. As long as there's a possibility, I think we can do it. And that began to happen when, eventually, having spent time with some writers, I thought, I'm going to have a go at this myself, largely because there wasn't any money left. Yeah. So I thought, because again, my wife kept on saying, why don't you write it yourself? If anybody knows about Celtic, it's you. You talk about nothing else. And I thought, okay, I'll have a go. And I don't know how to put this, but it turned out all right. It turned out, I was like, I think in this business you have to be your harshest critic yourself, And if it had been, I had done an earlier draft that was shite, absolute shite. And then,
are you saying that with hindsight? Did you realise?
Oh, I knew that. I wrote it and I thought, what is this? And there was something that was just, suddenly you just focused in a different way, and you just found it was falling onto the page. Then it was there. And then my draft was picked up by a guy I approached called Tom Sullivan, Irish writer director, who in 2021, I think, his film Aracht, which is Irish for monster, it was one of the famine films. Ireland's eventually just coming to terms with the famine experience after all that time. They're starting to make films about it. There's been 3 or 4. And this was one of the famine stories set in Connemara. And Tom, it was largely and almost entirely in the Irish language. It cost 2 and 6, and it was a tremendous piece of work by Tom. So I got in touch with him and got some money from Ireland at that point from Irish Screen, and he improved massively on my draft. And I thought, I think we're getting somewhere now, because you need 3 things to make a picture, right? You need, and pretty much usually in this order, you need a script, you need a director, and then you need a star. So the script was there eventually, and it had taken that long. So then the hunt was on for the director, and that wasn't a quick process either. But eventually I approached the right person. I'm so pleased that he's the one that's doing it. And it's a guy called Peter Mackie Burns, right, who's got a seat in the Lisbon Lions stand, inevitably. That's not why you get the job, but it doesn't harm, Peter's a lovely guy, which is unusual in directors, I have to say. a really lovely person, and a Celtic fan. He's already made 2 low-budget features, but his profile, if you like, I think was enhanced recently because he made a thing called Mayflies.
All right.
Andrew O'Hagan, the adaptation of Andrew O'Hagan's book. And again, the 2 stars in that are both Celtic fans.
Exactly. There's a wee thread developing here. And I have asked so many times, right? It intrigues me. And maybe other clubs have got a collection of people within the arts who support them. Maybe they do, but it seems to be that Celtic attracts. They don't attract them because you're already Celtic fans, but a lot of Celtic fans go out there and create, be that music or film, and they're big voices in politics. It's an incredible thing, literature. And you've just proven the fact by naming all these people. You know, we've spoken to Tony Curran a few years ago on a Celtic State of Mind. He helped us massively with the charity, actually, the campaign as well. We've never had Martin Compston on quite yet, but you know, fingers crossed that will happen. And there's a few others, but all these great actors, James McAvoy, they're all Celtic fans. Why is that?
I've reflected on that quite a lot myself. I think because going back quite a fair long way, I suppose, the professions weren't as open to Catholics as they were to non-Catholics. You know, there was a kind of working class, middle class thing going on there. So Catholics had to find other jobs. And then when it became possible to get jobs in media, I think the other element that comes into play is the Mass. I think that the Mass is a piece of incredible theatre.
Yeah.
That sounds pretentious, but it's true. You know, the elevation of the host is the climax of a piece of theatre. And I think Catholics, they even drink it in with their mother's milk. It's a state of original sin that they have that attraction to spectacle, to performance. And also they're nice guys. You know, the people I know that in the business tend to be nice people.
Open-minded.
Maybe that, yeah. And it's a political thing as well. I think we tend to be more left than right, you know, and thank God for that. And that comes into play. Although a lot of the politicians that started off left didn't stay that way, but we'll just leave that just now.
I know that's one of life's great, is it mysteries? I'm not quite sure. Is it financially driven? It's disappointing when that happens. It really is. In any walk of life.
Money changes people.
Absolutely. Because then they want to then look after, you know, feathering their own nest. And they're looking at the political ideals of other parties at that stage. And I think it's unthinkable, actually, the way that's gone. But you're right. I've spoken to people like Ken McCluskey, who talks about there always being musical instruments in his house. It was just something you did, you know, and the community aspect of maybe not having much, but telling stories and singing songs. So it's all art and it's creative and it's expressing yourself.
Yeah.
So that's a great.
And you can't ignore the Irish dimension of that either.
Absolutely.
I went to Romania in 2 vans with Ken and David to take aid to there when Scotland were playing in the European Championship. God, that was some week. 9 days in the back of a van, crushed.
But
with McCluskey.
Exactly, the McCluskey brothers. That sounds like it sounds to me as though during that period, though, you would have had a right good time telling stories, reminiscing.
Absolutely.
A similar state of mind to the people that you were in that van with.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about some of the aspects of your career that I find intriguing as well.
Is this okay for you so far?
Absolutely.
Good.
No, it meanders.
Good.
And you know, you're talking about your upbringing, and I guess maybe in your time, when you think about it, there would have been less opportunities to break into the industry, the film industry.
There wasn't an industry.
Yeah.
There really wasn't. Especially in Scotland, you know. There was a kind of, going back to the 60s and so on, there was a kind of extension of the Hollywood film industry, which was around Pinewood and that kind of area down in the south of England. And, you know, people who were grips, their sons became grips after them and so on. And there were, I don't want to get into a discursive sort of like story about how the Scottish industry emerged, but there were primitives and pioneers who were trying to create an industry before there was one here. And then Bill Forsyth happened, and that was a transformational point. He showed, I think, that it could be possible to hope to have work, hope to work in an industry that was telling its own stories. Channel 4 being coming into being made it a little bit better, but I'm making a political point because I just think it's true. I mean, we still remain an impoverished relative, up here. Until we're independent, we'll never have control of our own circumstances, and we'll never have our own film or television industry. It's just a fact, And I think there's fewer of them now, but it used to be a lot of guys who supported Celtic who would sing all the Republican songs, but they'd vote Labour, and I just couldn't understand it. I was arguing. I went, "What are you talking about? What are you talking about? A nation once again. Come on." And that was terribly important. But there were other sort of links, even at the BBC. John Byrne came along, and I was lucky enough I was working down in London at the BBC, and I bumped into Bill Bryden in the bar. And after 5 minutes, he offered me a job back up the road. And it was the time of Thatcher. I couldn't wait to get back, So I went, absolutely. And he said, John Byrne? I went, absolutely. He said, there's a thing called Tutti Frutti. I went, oh, okay. And he sent me the script. And I was getting into work on the tube in the morning, still in London before I'd made the move, reading the script. And I was embarrassing the whole carriage because I was howling my laughter reading this script, going, this is just amazing. And I remember going to say, I was introduced to John as John, this is your script editor, Peter. I don't work with script editors. I went, all right. But he said, did you phone me for the BBC when I was working in Leicester, designing that play? I went, aye, I did, John. He went, aye, you'll do.
You remembered the call?
Aye, he did. He remembered the call.
That's incredible.
That was okay. So, and that was the most joyous show. That was a fabulous show to do. And it was there's an old sort of conventional saw that, happy shows make bad outcomes and vice versa. But no, in this case, it was extraordinary. And I think Tutti Frutti, again, the BBC had never won a single BAFTA at that time. It got 13 nominations and 6 awards.
It was unbelievable.
They were actually embarrassed about it in BBC Scotland, a lot of them, because, they were showing them up.
Yeah. But that straight away, you're talking about John Byrne there. And as I say, there was a record in my house, and I didn't even know he had done the artwork for it. It was a Beatles record. And he'd done it under an assumed name. It was a compilation. And it was a really interesting shot of the 4 of them. And so almost like in a forest scene. But the way that it was painted was sensational. But he never signed it John Byrne. I'm not quite sure of the circumstances why. And then Tutti Frutti came on screen.
I'll tell you why. It's because he was trying to get his work into London galleries as a painter, as an artist. Right. And they wouldn't believe that a Scottish artist was, good enough to be shown in their galleries, to be sold. So he invented this guy called Patrick, and he invented a whole history for him. He was a sort of like a hobo that had taken to primitive painting and so on. And he went, "Oh, that's fine," and they all took his work. That's why the work signed Patrick. And the Humble Bums albums that he did, they were all signed Patrick.
Absolutely,
well.
that's incredible.
And I went to John's funeral just a year past November, and do you know, I think John's incredibly representative of what Scotland can do, and where it's still not recognised. Because I think Byrne, in every way, as a writer, as an artist, and even as a sartorial presenter of himself, is world class. But he's hardly known outside Scotland even now. And I think that's really sad, and I think it shouldn't be like that.
It's a travesty, really.
Yeah.
I mean, some of his sculpture works that I've seen are unbelievable. His artwork, incredible.
Yeah.
Obviously, a talented writer as well. And the Tutti Frutti artwork was John's own. I remember the image of Robbie Coltrane.
Yeah.
But we tuned in religiously. I was quite young at the time, and I loved it. I absolutely loved it, because it's a young Emma Thompson, right?
Yeah.
But there was this scene, and I said to you before we went live, I would love to know how something like this happens, right? So there's the scene, and it's Robbie Coltrane, and he's got his guitar case, and he's just walking with the windswept, with the waves smashing against him, and it's 2 tribes. And he reaches his destination, he just sits down, and then the wind's blowing in his face, and it's an incredible scene. How does something like that, is that, I mean, some people are ideas guys or whatever, I mean, is that something that's set in stone from day one? Is it part of the script, or do you come up with it when you see that beach scene?
John was one of the most controlling artist I've ever met in my life. He wanted to do everything. The only problem John didn't have was that there wasn't 4 of them, because he was trying to do the set design and the production designs. He wanted to be involved in the music and everything. So it was mostly it's in the script, but then you get a director coming along that'll enhance it. But John was also he was always on the set, so he was always there to consult. Tried to say no to John. He was always there to consult about what was happening.
Can I ask you a question about Robbie Coltrane? I loved
Yeah.
his portrayal in Cracker, and there's a great scene.
Celtic.
Yeah, I loved that scene. And then he appeared at Mike Galloway's benefit game in the main stand. But I never ever thought he was a Celtic fan, was he? Could you confirm or deny?
Wasn't he interested in football?
Wasn't he interested?
No. I knew Robbie. I wasn't a great friend of his, but I loved him. I wish I was more of a friend of his. He lived quite near me down in near Dumgoyne. He was interested in engineering and cars and
trains and stuff.
and stuff like that. I tried to get him to direct one of my projects once that I was developing. I always thought he was Orson Welles in waiting. He even looked like Orson Welles, and used to sometimes behave like Orson Welles. But he never got around to doing that. But football didn't make him into Robbie's life at all. No. Although I think was there a story? Was it Jimmy McGovern who actually put that in the script of Cracker, or was it Robbie that thought it up? I can't remember, but I might be misremembering that it was Robbie that said, "Let's
Great
do this."
scene.
Isn't it?
Oh, it was a great scene. So
Robert Carlyle, another Scottish actor, although he's a Rangers fan.
Yes, he is.
And good luck to him.
The thing is, he is a Rangers fan, but they're allowed one. They're allowed one of talent, Some of the other stuff you were doing, studying as a young man, moving about, you went to Bristol, didn't you?
Yeah.
And then you're working on productions like The Draftsman's Contract.
Yeah.
Whilst you're doing stuff like that, how are you able to keep up with Celtic? Because we're not talking smartphones and all that.
No. I mean, it was the day after the 10 men won the league before I found out we'd actually won it. It was that bad. I think it was in Norwich at that time. I got up as much as I could, and it was quite a lot. It was by the time I was in London, I was getting up almost every other weekend after a home game.
Right.
I'd get up at 5 and get the train up from Euston. And then I spent a ridiculous slab of my stipend on taking airplanes, usually British Midland because they weren't too expensive, or trains up to Glasgow. I mean, I really did as many as I could get to. I went to, and that was eventually one of the big reasons. Two of the big reasons for coming back was Thatcher and Celtic. I just missed Celtic too much, and I know that sounds sententious, but it's true.
Well, you're talking about the time that you're taking away from your spare time, the money that it costs, the travel. And we go right back to the origins of this football club, and it never fails to amaze me, the commitment to the Irish fan base coming over every single week, home away.
A couple of weeks ago, when 3 games in a row, remember 3 home games in a row? I usually get in the cafe now at the Emirates before the game quite early, because I can park there with my blue badge. And there's a bunch of guys from Donegal that I've got to know through my pal that I go with. So a lot of those guys came over 3 times and back in that week, and you're going, this is just extraordinary. I mean, I've been to Donegal a couple of times, but that's quite a travel. It's quite a trip in itself, the start of a holiday.
I talk about a state of mind, but that really is, to coin a bit of a cliche, a way of life whereby the entire life revolves around following Celtic.
Totally. I feel slightly guilty that not my entire life is Celtic, but if it was, I think I'd go mad.
I talk about a state of mind, but I can't imagine the commitment that these guys put in. And then I remember bumping into somebody on a European away day, and they knew exactly how many away games they had been to in Europe. And they were in the 100 plus club. And you think as the years go by, that group, there'll only be a hardcore group who have been to 100 plus European away games, but they plan their holidays, their finance, everything is planned around Celtic.
That's right.
Which I love. I absolutely love it. A few of the other...
Have you interviewed Paul the Tim yet?
No, I've met him a few times. Paul. Again, his entire life.
Absolutely.
Committed to watching Celtic. And everything is planned around it. As a youngster, because at the time we only had 4 channels, I've got great memories of things like Tutti Frutti, and I remember watching something one night, and I loved things like Just a Boys Game and all that kind of stuff that was filmed in gritty parts of Scotland and Greenock. And I remember watching something with my old fella, and I wasn't quite sure what it was, but it was in there for a long, long time. And only when I was looking at your kind of filmography, if you like, did I realise that you were involved in it. And it was called Leaving, right?
Danny Boyle, the other Danny Boyle.
And I watched this when it was on.
Yeah,
It left a mark on me.
yeah.
Because I remember the boy blessing himself in the football park, thinking probably at that time, oh, he's just copying Peter Grant. And then there was a darker element to that story,
yeah.
and the boy choked in his own vomit.
Aye.
That stayed with me since 1989. And here I am talking to you.
I know.
What was your involvement in that?
I was a script editor at BBC Scotland. That was when I came back to work with John, and the rest of my job, it wasn't just working with John, I was a script editor. And we actually, Bill thought, chatting to Bill Bryden, I thought, why don't we get some writers in, some new writers, and see if we can, just encourage them. So we got 5 writers in, and I spent a day with them, gave them a day talking about scripting and how you script and what the writer's problems are and all the rest of it. And we gave them 5 small commissions, and Leaving was one of them.
Right.
And I think out of the 5, and they were actually, I think they were all men to my shame, to our shame. I think at least 3 of them became full-time writers and got work in television. And Danny was, that was a very autobiographical film,
right.
Leaving. But I completely agree with you. I think it's one of the best things that BBC Scotland's ever done. It was really tremendous. Although, one of the things I remember most about it was standing in was a playground at the end, if you remember, the playground scene, which was shot in Denniston. And I was aboard, I think it was College St Andrews, I can't remember. And I looked up, and I looked at the sign, and I thought, the apostrophe, it was wrong. And I owned up, because there was an apostrophe in the script. It was my fault that design had taken it up and misrepresented it.
Right.
It was my misrepresentation. So I had to put my hand up to that. I can't remember how we solved it. If we just let it go and hoped to just put it down.
Nobody noticed.
Thick Irish Catholics.
Can't
spell.
Misused apostrophes. Your involvement with Tutti Frutti and your friendship with Emma Thompson took you to the Oscars.
Yeah. How do you know this? God, you do your work, don't you? This is really.
I thought it was a great story. This is a great story.
It was. Where do I start with that one? Well, it was again. There wasn't a producer on Tutti Frutti until very late, so I was kind of doing the producer's job, finding a director and help with Tony. Tony was the director eventually, and then with John, the 3 of us sitting trying to considering who we might cast in the main roles. Robbie fell into it; he was there with the bricks, but we tried a couple of female actors before Emma, and one of them wasn't available. One of them was doing a piece of theatre. One of them was told by her agent she was doing too many Scottish parts. I suspect she regretted that, unfortunately. And I found myself, I went home, hang on, I said, I'm just back to London, as you know. I said, I went to see a production, Me and My Girl, was a revival of that old play. And there's a woman in it, and she's really hot at the moment, Emma Thompson. And I think her mother's Scottish. And she's absolutely brilliant. And it was true, Emma's career was on the rise at that point. And John went, yeah, I know who she is. So I think we got her in the following day, and she walked in the room, and she had the part about 3 seconds later. And she's wonderful in it. And she was up for 2 awards because she also did another big London production called, and I'm going to forget what it was called, one of those big posh foreign period things set in Egypt and during the war. But she was in that as well. And so flash forward, and a friend of mine invites me to be her first non-gay partner at the Oscars. She worked for Sony Pictures, and I went, yeah, great, okay, Marcel, let's do that, that'd be wonderful, yeah. So when we went to the Oscars, I'll try and keep this short because it can be much longer, but we're driving to the Oscars in the limo and all that, and I'm thinking, this is really unreal. And then we just got out, and Marcy said, I haven't told you, we're sitting in the front row. I went, oh, for God's sake. And we're sitting in the front row, and I was the only person in the front row I didn't recognise. Sitting beside Al Pacino, and Clint Eastwood and stuff like that. But I was also sitting with Emma Thompson's mother.
Right.
Because she'd been nominated for Remains of the Day, I think it was, and she won it. She won it. But so we ended up, going to the parties afterwards, and I was holding Emma's Oscar and all the rest of it, and chatting away to her mother, who was great. She's still lives up in the Western Islands. I think she's still with us. So it was coming full circle. She said, "What are you doing here?" Because I'd actually met her at one of the parties before the actual Oscars, and she went, "What are you doing here?" "I don't know. I don't know. I know why you're here, but we're looking after you." Because Marcy worked for the company that produced Emma's picture, and that's how there was a connection.
What was the one they filmed in Dunoon? You remember that?
Who, BBC?
And Emma was in it, and Matt Costello.
Oh, that was a National Film School short,
right?
And it was set against a base in Holyloch. I'm doing pretty well, but I don't think I can remember the title.
I watched it recently because Matt was on Acsom.
All right.
Last year, and I watched that on YouTube actually. And a very young Emma Thompson.
That was it. Yeah, she was. It was National Film School production, and it was. I think it was directed by He's actually a pal, but I'm going to forget his name. It's my age. I'm doing really bad on names. I think the director of that was Paul. Do you know the Scotland's famous walks and all that? The ones that he walks the rivers and he walks the hills.
Right.
Do you know what I'm talking? Do you know what I'm talking about? No. This is going to be embarrassing. I hope he doesn't see this. He's not interested in Celtic or football, so he'll be all right. But he directed. He was at the National Film School.
Fantastic. I mean, the other thing I was going to say to you, first season I started to go and actually physically go to the games was the centenary season. The reason I wasn't allowed to go earlier was because the football was my dad's thing. He did it with his mates. They worked all week, and it was really tough, laborious jobs. And then they would go out and they'd have a drink and watch.
What did your dad do?
He was a pitman. So
Right.
he was a mechanical fitter in the pit.
Right.
And he still wears, which is great, but it was his thing, and I only realised that many, many years later. Why is he not taking me to the games, But I ended up going in 1987 to watch Celtic. And that season, there's a fairy tale about this club. I always remember quotes like that, and Tommy Byrne's talking about they're there and they're always there.
Yeah.
And that was like the greatest introduction for me to supporting Celtic and going to the games, because I did feel there was some fairy dust, there was something special.
Yeah.
You never ever thought you were going to get beat. It was like a script had been written. All these cliches that you hear time and time again. So it's going to pull me back to paradise, right? So picture the scene. Everybody who's tuning into this will know the beginnings of this football club. And it's so important, I think, generation upon generation, for something to happen where we look back. So we're now in a period of generational domination. And there's young fans who know nothing but winning, which is great. I'm really happy for them. But it's so important to go back and say, this is the beginnings of the football club. So try and paint a picture of Glasgow in the 1887 when this happened.
Absolutely. There's a lot of parallels between what's happening now in the world, all over the world, and particularly in this part of the world, and what the world was like, and particularly what Glasgow was like in the 1880s. The generations the Irish generation that followed the famine, if you'd 5 bob, you went to America. If you'd 2 bob, you went to either Liverpool or Glasgow. So they were pouring off the boats in their thousands, creating incredibly difficult social conditions in this very part of the city, in the East End, east of Glasgow Cross. They had the worst housing conditions in Europe, The jobs that they had were the worst of jobs, if they could get jobs at all, because they were discriminated against. And they really had nothing. That's why it's called Paradise. Paradise, it sounds like the easiest title, but it can't be called anything else, because these people thought they were going to paradise.
Yeah.
And even if they ended up in a shithole, in one way they were going to paradise, and that was the football club. Certainly Marlinale Football Club. It was dreadful. It's probably hard to imagine how dreadful it was, and we depict that very graphically in the script. What Paradise is about, it's not a football film. It's only very tangentially, only very marginally is it a football film. It's a film about community. and it's a film about migration, the two things together. And I think I was counting up. I think I've seen Celtic win 81 major awards since I started watching them. 81. League, Scottish Cup, League Cup, and the one by the Big Cup. You know, I'm still not spoiled, I don't think, because there was a period, and there have been periods when it was still quite relatively hard to be a Celtic fan.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, a lot of the younger fans these days, maybe it's a generational thing, maybe it's not just football. I was up at Dundee on Saturday, and you get a sense of entitlement that's not entirely healthy sometimes, you know? You get a sense of arrogance that's shouldn't be in the Celtic culture, you know? And I don't mean that widely or anything, but you know, they've known nothing but success, so, but maybe they're not being successful in other aspects of their life, so you can't be too critical of that. But I don't want to say Celtic having the kind of triumphalist culture that exists in another part of this city, you know, because then you just end up hating human beings for no good reason, and we shouldn't be doing that. That sounds like a sermon. I'm not sermonising.
No,
does that answer the? Yes,
yeah,
that was a question.
It's important to realise there's a difficulty, like you say, when all you've known is success, because it becomes embedded in the culture of the terrace as well as in the football club. And I think in the football club that's a good thing because it sets standards.
Absolutely.
You know, you can't allow Celtic to go through a trophyless season. That's a disaster. Absolutely. But it's getting to the point sometimes where we lose a game and that's a disaster, and you think, no, really, in the great scheme of things, it's not.
Or we get a treble and it's tedious.
Yeah, tedious treble. Absolutely. We need to get T-shirts made for that. But you're right, the paradise is actually, you know, setting foot on this soil should be paradise because of what you're actually fleeing at that time. Because, I mean, if you think about the potato famine in the 1840s, this is 40 odd years later.
That's right.
You know, and they're still trying to flee for a better life, and then they land and then they're persecuted. Yeah. And, you know, Celtic were a beacon, a hope, community. This is a place where, you know what, you can come under our wing and we're all going to be part of this together. And Celtic never ever lost that identity, I don't think. But I've heard a lot of people, a lot older and wiser than me, talking about the significance of that European Cup win. Because we talk about, you know, doing it the Celtic way and the beautiful football. But what that actually sent was a message to the underprivileged, the disenfranchised, and these people who, you know, whose generation before them perhaps had come over to Scotland from Ireland and fleeing a famine and fleeing the conditions that they were in Ireland. You, right, were a Celtic fan. I think you said before your first cup final was 61. Is that right?
That's right. I'm 9 years old. I was born in 52.
So by the time they're winning the European Cup, you're seeing the cusp of that golden era.
Yeah.
How did it feel?
Impossible to describe, except the biggest disappointment in my life was that my dad had me booked in a car for Lisbon with some guys that he didn't know too well. And they found out the day before I was due to leave that I was only 15 and they decided not to take me. Can you imagine how that felt?
Even now, you're looking back on it.
I know. You know that famous photograph of the American soldiers at Iwo Jima putting up a flag?
Right.
I think of Celtic in those terms. When they found the club, it's not just a football club. It's a beacon. It's a flag. It's something you rally around. It became hugely important politically, socially, and intellectually as well. You know, this is the cohering element. That and the church were the two cohering elements for the community. And I'm so proud. I get irritated sometimes when I hear people saying, I'm proud to be Scottish, or I'm proud to be this, I'm proud to be that. I'm quietly just lucky to be a Celtic fan. You know, I am proud, but I'm not going to tell anybody because, you know, it sounds as if you're boasting. And that's why it's so important to tell this story. And you know, the talking about that generation that came over, some of them, they all worked hard. They did have a choice, but some of them had managed by the mid 1880s to get a foothold, maybe the first couple of rungs on the ladder. And most of them were publicans in one way or another. They were involved in the spirit trade, and they were the guys who became the first Celtic board. And they were also the guys who put the money in. Now, how precious was a penny in those days? Yeah? You're a generation and a half away from a disastrous famine. Money means something. And they found a lot of money in relative terms. They risked a lot of money to get the club established. There was then battles about money when it became successful, and was it going to stay as a charitable venture, or was it going to become a purely commercial venture? And I can see both sides of it, but I think the most badly done person at that time was Dr. John Conway, because he was a traditionalist, and he was a doctor. I think he was the first Catholic since the Reformation to graduate in medicine at the University of Glasgow, my own alma mater. And he was offered all sorts of job down south at Harley Street. And he turned it down because he wanted, he lived in Monteithrow on the edge of the green. And no, he wanted to work with his people who were sick. And these are the real heroes. Although Conway was very badly treated by the progressives on the board at that time. So not every story is black or white. There's shades of grey in all of these stories. And I think that'll be represented in the picture when made. And I hope that there are people like those guys around now who deeply understand, as we're talking about, what the club means, who will help us get this picture made. We're not asking them to give us charity. We're not asking for anything, but would you consider investing?
Well, I'm going to go back to the video we made at St Mary's. We called it The Glory and the Dream. The song had already been written.
Good book.
But and by the way, Tom Campbell just passed away last week.
Oh, Christ. Pat was in hospital last week as well.
Yeah. So Tom, obviously he lived in Canada.
Yeah.
So he passed away. I got to know Tom as well. He was 91. So The Glory and the Dream song maybe lent itself to that. I never actually asked J.J. Gilmer who wrote it. But we went down to St Mary's, and the reason we took this dusty tape from the vaults and resurrected it, re-recorded it, did a video, was to raise money for St Mary's, who were in dire straits, 14 or 16 grand in debt, and they needed repairs to the roof. And the situation, and this is just fact, the reason Acsom got involved was to provide a platform for other Celtic fans to understand that was the situation, because it wasn't made public. And then do something about it. And through not just the single, but various other endeavours, we managed to raise 30,000 quid, and they needed that at that time. And my frustration at that point was, what are the club doing? What are the club doing? Because this cannot be forgotten. The significance of this place in Celtic's history cannot be forgotten. But it was the fans. It was the fans that raised the money.
In fairness, I was at the Mass the night before the Barcelona game. Were you there yourself?
No.
That was talking about a spiritual occasion. You were saying earlier on about going into St Mary's, or a special place. It's almost like a portal or something to something else. I think Dermot Desmond gave them £40,000 that night but that might have been towards one of the artworks that was in the place, not the painting by what's his name?
Howson.
But he did put some money in, but that might have been just directly involved with one of the elements. I don't think it was towards keeping the rain from coming in through the roof. But
the mosaic, maybe the mosaic.
I think it was the mosaic. Yeah, it was. That's right. But whether all of that was for that, or if some of it went to the church, I don't know. But they've also they've sent the parish priest somewhere else, haven't they?
They have. Yeah, that was very unfortunate.
I think it's more than unfortunate. It's unforgivable.
Yeah, it really was.
I want to be sidetracked here, but
No, you're right.
Why?
I know. And I think
he was doing hugely important work in the community again, going all the way back. He was sort of fulfilling the same role and function.
Yeah, and it was him that got the ball rolling with our involvement to raise that cash as well. So when you're talking about a film, I think to myself, well, a football club, where someone wants to create a movie, a cinematic masterpiece of the club's origins, you would be all over it. You would think, you would support it.
Well, football movies don't play. That's what Hollywood will tell you. That's what Hollywood in England and over in Hollywood will tell you. And they're largely right when you look at them. The best known one is the Second World War one with
Escape to Victory.
with Sylvester Stallone.
Yeah.
Although that didn't do much business either, but it's a bit of a cult movie. This isn't. I've said before. It's very. You'd be mad trying to sell this project to financiers as a football film, because the conventional wisdom is that it's box office poison. So I try and sell it differently, and actually I sell it authentically because, as I said earlier, it's really about the community that built the club rather than the club playing football. It ends with, spoiler alert, it ends with the first game. You know, that's
perfect.
It is, and there's also things going on in the script that involve wider aspects of the Irish community, you know, and their aspirations and their political aspirations and hopes and dreams. So it leaves room for other movies, of course, but it's the right period to choose. If you're going to make anything about Celtic, it has to be about it's the best origin story in all of football and all of sport. You know, that's what it has to be about. But you know, you've got to sell it as, and I've got a few pitch lines on it, but it's my pitching lines are it's Gangs in New York meets Field of Dreams in Irish Victoria in Glasgow. You got to do that. It sounds like a joke, but the elevator pitch is, here's the, oh right, okay, I'll give you 5 minutes then if you say that. I'm still finding, until we get the star, we've got the first two elements. Until we get the star, we've not got the full package. When you've got the full package, I'm still trying to approach potential investors early, perhaps earlier than we should, but you've got to see if the doors will open.
Well,
so it's hard. It's a lot of Celtic fans think, oh, it'll be dead easy to make. Everyone wants to see it. It's not like that.
No,
it really isn't. You know, because of the league we play in, we are not the worldwide international brand we should be. We're the biggest club in the smallest league in the world, you know. We are actually, I keep on telling people this, I say, we're the best supported club in the world per head of population.
Yeah.
No one comes anywhere near it. Celtic are a massive club in the wrong place. They're in the right place to start off with, but, you know, football is changing all the time. I kind of hate modern football generally, though. I detest what it's become. And I don't know what another fan, an intelligent fan like me who sees it otherwise.
It's soulless.
It is.
It's soulless, and a big part of what keeps Celtic authentic, I would go back, is the origin story. The thing that would attract you as a non-supporter to the football.
That's right.
Is the origin story.
You've also got to sell it as something that it's an international film that's going to be exciting to watch for people who are not interested in football at all.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why you try and find these taglines that they'll go, all right, I would go and see that. That sounds okay. If MD remembers Field of Dreams, which is one of my favourite movies of all time. Have you seen?
No, I've seen Gangs in New York though.
Of course you have. I actually think that was a big missed opportunity. But we'd have to talk about that another time. I don't think it was what it should have been, what it threatened to be.
Yeah.
I think you can. I thought the central performance was bizarre, and of course that other mob are using him now as
I know on their
an emblem. I don't
That's incredible.
because he butchered Catholics apparently.
Yeah.
There you go.
You know, when we're talking about this as a campaign at the moment, there is an ongoing campaign, and we're going to show the trailer today.
Well, just to explain, I'm being so far we've had development money from the institutions like BFI, Creative Scotland and Screen Ireland, and we're now in a phase where, and also I had to then, when the money was spent, I had to go out to individual Celtic fans that I knew, and they were very generous, and they put in a decent amount of money to get to where we are now. The coffers are now empty, so I've raised this GoFundMe thing to literally just, if the company fails, the project fails, you've got to still pay the bills.
Yeah.
Pay the internet, the phone, you know, the accountant, everything that costs to do it. So that's to get us to the point, hopefully, of pre-production when we've got all the elements in place, and then we can finance it properly and get it down to making the picture. I just wanted to explain that, and I'm very careful. I've been very careful at setting up the GoFundMe to not say that this is definitely going to get made, because that would be. And in fact, it's a thing. Do you know? Can I say this? Having taken this far and people now knowing about it, that's a horrible sense of responsibility.
Yeah.
You know, people need to see this. I'm genuinely not afraid of dying. I'm just not. But I am afraid of dying before getting this bloody thing, mate.
It must
Does that
happen.
sound
Not at all.
suggestions? Do you know?
I sometimes, I've got to admit, I sometimes say things and put them out there so that it makes me do them. Because if you make it public, then there's a responsibility to get it done.
Aye, exactly.
We're going to share the link to the GoFundMe underneath this video as well.
Good man.
And this comes from someone who has managed to achieve a movie the size of Rob Roy. Now, what I was interested in is how Scottish film, if you like, was when you started off. And then you fast forward to the production of that movie, which was sensational. Being filmed around about the same time as Braveheart, and how far Scottish film had come. You know, when you think about that, tell me about that though, because you're talking about this being a massive ongoing project. The responsibility, Rob Roy, must have been as big.
Not necessarily, but well, the way it happened was I'd been working at the BBC back in Scotland for a few years, and I'd quite a lot of frustration in because there was stuff I wanted to do that you don't get to make within the confines of the BBC. So you take a big deep breath and you say, I'm going to become independent. And I'd got a few wee commissions at the beginning of that. I was living up in Balfron at the time, and I was thinking, this is tough. And I was driving home in my wee battered Fiat 500 one nice night, and you always get a wee lift in your heart when you see the hills, you know, just at the Dungoyne distillery. You see the Arracan Alps, and I was having a wee conversation, and a sort of an interior conversation with myself, thinking there must be something that's really big just here, because you know it's what's so wonderful. Must be something that's not been done or hasn't been done for a while. And I kid you not, a wee voice in my head went, "It's Rob Roy," and I almost went like that. What? It was like whisper in the ear. And what? It's Rob Roy. I thought, that's creepy, that's weird. So I stopped in the main street in the village, and there was a library then, and got a few books out, and I stayed up all night reading about Rob Roy, because I was vaguely aware of there was this bandit kind of rascal, you know. But I then did a deep dive into who and what he was, and it was like, oh, this is really good. And I had vague memories of the earlier film with James Robertson Justice and whoever it was Rob Roy, I can't remember. And that was the start of a process that it was incredibly easy, actually. I mean, it was, if I had known it was impossible, I wouldn't have set out to do it, right? But luckily I was naive enough to think this could lead to something. My big writing hero then was Alan Sharp, the working class guy for Greenock, who found himself in Hollywood having written screenplays in his tenement house. And then
Did he work at IBM?
He worked at IBM.
That was the big employer back then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. He wrote Night Moves for Arthur Penn. He wrote The Hired Hand for Peter Fonda. He wrote Alzana's Raid for Robert Aldrich. You know, and this was, you know, he was the man. And this was before you could send stuff, you know, in an email, and I sent you.
Yeah.
I sent him a package. I wrote a treatment. I sent it to Alan Sharp in New Zealand. Alan had gone down there to avoid what he was certain was going to be the nuclear holocaust. So he was living in New Zealand. And about a month later, I got a package back, a letter back saying, oh, this is quite interesting. Why don't you come down and we'll talk about it? And I went, what? So I went to what was the predecessor of Scottish Screen, and they gave me money to go down to New Zealand to see Alan. And I ill-advisedly had a wee session before I got on the plane, and I arrived in New Zealand really hungover, and Alan met me, and we went for breakfast and so on, and then we went to Calwow Island where he lived. He lived off in this island off the mainland, and within about an hour of being on the island, we went out in his wee boat, wee dinghy, he had a bigger boat and a weir boat, and then we were in the middle of the Pacific, and he capsized it, and I was like, I found myself going, this is really unreal. This is surreal. What am I doing here? I was a windsurfer at the time, so it didn't really bother me. And then I thought, wait a minute, sharks. So, in the boat as quickly as possible. And I could spend all day talking about how the script came about. But Alan and I set to working on it. And he eventually wrote a draft. He was back in Scotland, and he delivered it. And I sat in my house and said, "This is terrible, Alan. It's really, really bad." And he went, "I know." And I talked about. I think I did. I did the best hours work of my lifetime, because I found myself. I didn't have notes. I was just talking. It was like stream of consciousness. Here's what I think has to happen. Blah blah. This can't happen. This isn't right. He went, "Oh, I think you're right." And he came back a few weeks later, and it was like, it was there. It was magnificent.
Yeah.
And he went, "God, there's a chance." So you've got the script, right? Who's next? The director. I offered it to Michael Caton-Jones, and he turned it down through his agent. Michael had done 2 or 3 pictures at that time. Another Celtic man. And I bumped into him again at the Edinburgh Festival in the George Bar. And they said, Peter, I want to talk to you. I went, "It's okay, Michael, nice to see you." He said, "No, I want to talk to you." No, I want to talk to you. He said, "I think I made a mistake. I think I want to do it." I went, "Rob Roy?" I went, "Aye, great." Because at that point he was really hot. John Calley had just been put into the United Artists to revive the studio, famous Hollywood name, and he was putting the next Bond picture together, and he wanted Michael to do it, and Michael turned it down, and he said, "I don't want to do it, but I want to do this." And he put the script in, and he went, "Oh, I know Alan Sharp, he's a great writer." And Michael also used to drink in the Formosa bar across from the Paramount Gates in West Hollywood, and he was in there, and then Liam came in, and they knew each other, and they were having a beer, and he went, "I've got a great script with Alan Sharp." And he just got the Oscar for Schindler's List,
right.
So he was getting all the shite that pours in, And he said, "You should read it," and Liam read it and went, "Yeah, let's do it." Took it to Cally. Cally said, "That's it." I was having dinner with pals in our house, and the call came through. It's green lit. What? The picture's going to happen. So that was kind of how it went. And the great thing about the studio was they didn't, you think they'll be making our life a hell. They were great. They turned up, so everything was okay. They were happy. It was joyful. It was really wonderful.
It seemed to just click.
It just clicked. We had the right idea at the right time, and then there must have been something in there, because there was this other big. But when you wait 100 years and then 2 of them come along at once.
Fantastic.
In fact, the very first day of shooting, when Glenn Nevis was the first day of shooting for Braveheart, 2 big pinewood units. One halfway up the glen, the other at the top of the glen. It was like, "Hi guys." Yeah,
what a feeling.
It was unreal. Well, I mean, my day after that, we were standing in, Alan and I standing in Glencoe watching the early scenes, and Alan going, "It's too much. It's always just too much. It's too much."
No, that's incredible.
I had 2 ambitions. I wanted to make a Hollywood picture, and I wanted to make a big Scottish picture, and they both came
at the same time.
Yeah.
But from just a concept,
yeah,
to then see that grow.
Well, in fairness, the thing that inspired me partly to do the Rob Roy thing was that there had been a couple of pictures just before it. One was The Last of the Mohicans, and the other one was actually Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Yeah.
And I thought, there's something. Oh yeah, of course. We've got that. We've got Rob Roy. So there was obviously a flavour for male historical heroes at that time that was going about.
The timing was right. I remember seeing that Robin Hood movie at the Pictures back in the day when we used to do stuff like that. We've had David Heyman on a Celtic State of Mind recently.
Yeah, a wee part in Rob Roy.
Yeah, the wee part. I only noticed that last night, actually. And we've also had Phil Differ.
Oh, I know Phil.
And Phil name-checked Only a Game. He name-checked it that day. He was talking about Only an Excuse.
Oh, right. That's right. That's right.
Aye. And because I was talking about the name, coming up with the name, and I was actually saying to him, there's still a place somewhere, maybe it's online or a podcast, for that type of humour about Scottish football. I'm not quite sure anybody's doing it like that. And I heard that they're resurrecting it, but Only a Game is one of the things that people name check all the time. You created it. I mean, talk us through that process as well, because Scottish football's always been rich with characters, personalities, stories. You delved into that.
Well, I was working at the BBC in Scotland, and I was in the corridor, and Phil had his office right across from me, so he had a wee statue of the Virgin Mary with a Celtic scarf on. in his office, you know. And he never went to the games. He never went to a game, Phil. But he was a lovely man, very funny man. And, you know, I think they were rehearsing sort of like, they're always taking the piss out of McIlvany and other, you know, rival. And when it came out, can I do it? Can I do the opening of the first official game of football played in Scotland was in 1314, immediately after the Battle of Bannockburn, when two teams of victorious Scots kicked the severed head of an Englishman around the bloody battlefield. It was a pure game with defences well on top and few genuine goalmouth incidents, according to Duke Bailey of the Sunday Post, who was present at the time.
Brilliant. But I remember listening to it on the radio, you know, the radio times, and talking about there will be no panic buys, just panic. And it just tapped into, a mindset.
Well, I mean, it was actually, it was the first social history of football, I think, anyway. I can't even think of another one, because it was meant to be presented. And Kevin, it was, there's somebody that needs to get mentioned here, which is my, God rest him, Kevin McCara, who was a good pal. Because Kevin was a PhD student at that time, and we used to meet after the games in the Ingram Bar in Queen Street with Hugh Keevans and Pat Woods and various others. And
what the conversations! Imagine taping them.
I know
they would have been podcast episodes on themselves.
They weren't bad. They weren't bad. But Kevin was doing his PhD at the time, but he'd also mounted an exhibition about the history of Scottish football.
Right.
And that's where we met, and we remained great friends. I was very honoured to be one of the few people at his funeral and spoke at the time of COVID, and spoke a few words. The nicest man in the world, and a beautiful writer. And that was the other thing about, we had passions. We had football as a passion, and maybe in my case I had movies as a passion. But we really looked up to people like McIlvany and John Rafferty and other great, and indeed McCara, really great writers about football, who saw in football something much more than 22 guys kicking the ball about a park, who could talk about it in existential terms and societal terms and historical terms and political terms, And, that's kind of, it was that, I think, double inspiration from Kevin and myself that led to that getting made. Although we both get kind of ripped off with the BBC on it, but that was the BBC. It got made, and you can still get it on YouTube, I discovered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking at that just the other night. Now, just, you were saying that, I never knew Kevin. You were friends with him, but he did attend one of my book launches. So you imagine that.
Well, he's very literary. Yeah.
And he turned up and supported me at this book launch, bought a book, stayed in touch via email, just very, very supportive of someone who was just trying to do something in the early days.
Absolutely. Well, was that before he got ill, yeah?
Yeah. And then I think we exchanged a few messages after that, and then I'd seen a few things online. It was very sad, but when I read his writing, when I read some of the, even just match reports from historical newspapers in Scottish football, when I'm doing my research, and you're looking at the quality of the literature, it's unbelievable that they're actually writing about Scottish football.
Absolutely.
And I think it's been lost to a massive degree with the clickbait kind of generation now. You've just got to be first. No one cares about the quality.
I buy the Sunday Times largely because it's one of the few real newspapers, even though I hate its politics. There's still some decent writing in that sometimes. There's still some decent writing in The Guardian, but the pressure in newspapers is so intense. I mean, I think there was a great time to be a football writer, in the 80s and 90s when the expenses were whatever they were.
And there was a real culture back then as well, speaking to some of the people involved in that industry, where it was a hard kind of living culture as well. You mentioned someone there, Hugh Keevans, who's still a voice of Scottish football to this day. And he's been talking in disparaging terms about some of Celtic's signings. And we've been talking about it this all week,
He's a provocateur.
He is very, very much so. Very much so. I remember talking to him, and he spoke about growing up, and in his living room, he says it was like the scene in The Commitments where it was the Pope and Elvis. He goes, it was the Pope and Charlie Tully in his house.
That's right.
But there's a lot of chat around Celtic, where we are and where we're going. 4 in a row, European aspirations. You have seen it all. You've seen it all. You've seen the peak. You've seen Celtic at the peak of our powers. You've seen, in the 1990s where we were 8 minutes away from receivership, and then we've started growing again. And in the last 25 years, it has been domination, unlike anything we've ever seen in Scottish
I also
football.
saw the Rangers die, which was...
You did, yeah. And another version arising from the ashes. They hate being reminded of that, though, Peter.
No,
They really do. What I always like to think about, though, is what's next. You've spoken there about Celtic being in Scottish football. You can outgrow where you are. You can outgrow your environment. I think Celtic are at that point. The only thing we don't seem to have done is 10 in a row. We're 4 into another stab at that. Where would you like Celtic to go? You've seen them as European giants. You've seen them, down in the dumps, and you've now seen them as a dominant force domestically. Where do you think we can go from here?
I think the choice won't be entirely ours. I think there will be greater movements in the topography of football. I think looking at how close there came to being a European Super League, I don't think that's gone away. I think it'll be revived in some form. It's already still there among the super clubs. I'd like to think that part of me doesn't want to see Celtic being in an environment where they're spending £100 million on a player, a club that was founded in charity. I'd almost like to see an alternative football universe. I know this isn't going to happen, but I'd like to see a sort of an honest football set up internationally and let the big clubs do what they want to, because there isn't the same passion in it. There's more passion at a Cowdenbeath game sometimes or a Dumbarton game than there would be at the big places where the prawn sandwich brigades, rule. And still, I've always wanted to see, like Steen did, I've always wanted to see Celtic in a British league at least. I think it's absurd that Welsh teams can play in an English league when we can't play in what should be a British league. But I don't know where it's going to go. I think Celtic still aren't as big a club as they should be. I think the club has been, frankly, too cautious and too conservative, and hasn't taken advantage of some of the opportunities that have presented themselves. Maybe this is a case in point. I would like to think that it would be nice to think the club would eventually, perhaps, get behind this, which they've not really done so far. I can talk about that if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to know the club's position on it.
Yeah, it's a good. I raise it because I think it's an unavoidable question. I took it to the club almost as soon as we had the idea, and there was an initial, well, that sounds okay sort of response. We'll see what happens. There was even talk of putting some money in, some development in right at the beginning. But more recently, when we eventually had a script, I thought it was time to show them the script. I was never sure about it because there was always that sort of feeling about that control was an issue and, dominance was an issue. But I thought, well, what's to be lost? So I gave them the script. By the way, the other thing about dealing with Celtic is they take forever. You approach them, you have a meeting, nothing happens, and then you have to chase them up, then maybe 6 months later and so on. So this takes a long time. But to their credit, they read the script, and I thought they would hate it because I think it's kind of a bit on the nose. It's kind of real. It's real, and it's political, and it deals with the sectarianism. And I think Celtic, understandably perhaps, have tended to shy away from that. But, there is this... If you tell this story, you have to tell the full story. And they loved it. They absolutely loved it. The 3 major people at Celtic Park said, this is fantastic. And to quote Kevin McKenna, who also gave it to read, our journalist friend, he said, it's magnificent, it has to happen. And then something happened. Around about November, I got an email from Tony Hamlin, who was one of the 3 involved. I can say that, I think. And it was, well, Peter, we've had a look at this again. We've showed it to our lawyers, and we don't think we can get involved, and for these 2 reasons. And they provided 2 reasons. And I read them and went, this is nonsense. This is bullshit. One of the reasons was to do with we can't get involved in tax schemes. There are no tax schemes involved in this picture. As the producer's tax credit, which is standard for any British picture, that the producer, you get a 40% of 80% back in your hand to play with. And there was another thing about we can't all I've ever asked from Celtic in this project is to either help get it on the table, which one of them could do. He was the only one that could do that, of decision makers. But otherwise to put us in touch with the high net worth Celtic fans. There's a lot of them. A lot of guys have done well. And these are the guys, I think, who are in the same position as the O'Shaughnessy's and the Grants and the others, way back at the beginning, who perhaps could make an investment decision. Yeah, we're not asking for charity, it's an investment. So I'm a member of I'm an invited member of the forum, and there was a meeting just before Christmas, not long after I got the email. And I stood up, I found myself, I'm going to do this. I stood up and said to Michael, I've got a lot of respect for you, which I do. I think you've attended every meeting of the forum. I think it says a lot for the regard you seem to have for the fans, that things are like that. I said, and I was presenting it to the room. I said, what this project, told them briefly what it was, and I said, and you've come back and said, great, and then you've come back and said, no, because of reasons that are, frankly, to use a technical term, bullshit, right? I wasn't doing it to make them uncomfortable, but they were uncomfortable about it. And I said, I'm not saying this to, make difficulties for you, but please, would you reconsider? Because there are no reasons in the way of you doing this. All we're asking is, and previously they've been talking about setting up sessions with the rich guys in hotels in London. It was, we're going to get behind this. And then, so you can guess and I can guess what's happened there that's suddenly stopped the train in its tracks. I think they have to come back, because if we do get this made without them, they're going to be awfully embarrassed.
Oh, definitely.
And also, it's a missed opportunity.
But these things, in terms of when you get to the stage of speaking to the football club, can sometimes surprise you, Peter, as you well know. This has to happen. This movie has to happen. There's no two ways about it. And it's interesting that the discussion of Paradise throughout the 8 years of A Celtic State of Mind has been prevalent. It's popped into conversations, particularly when I'm talking to people who are in the industry and actors, etc.
That's when you feel responsible, as I say in the background. They're still talking about, oh God,
you've got to do this. I know. Reminding you, it must be done. But it's great to know that it's still alive.
Very much.
And I want to, try and expose it as much as possible. Try and support the project as much as we possibly can.
It's hugely appreciated.
And at any point as well in the future, if you want to come back because you think it might work to talk again, and push it a wee bit further.
The big question you have to ask yourself, we have to ask ourselves, is if I could get your 50,000 members or followers of Acsom to put in 100 quid each, we could definitely get this made.
Yeah.
You could get 5 million quid. Are my maths right? I think they are. Yeah.
Yes. They are
50,000,
100%.
And you put it that when you go, because I can. It's a £15 million budget, and that's tight for a historic feature. But it's at the top of where you can get your 40% back for the government. It would be really interesting to see if there could be an international effort got together to get this picture made. Because I think Celtic have so many good friendships with clubs around the world. Look at Bilbao.
Yeah.
I'd love to see them win that this year. It'd be wonderful.
Yeah, I know.
Going through the streets of Glasgow with Irish flags, silly strips. It'd be interesting if we get some Polly back inside Union Berlin. I think they might have a friendship with the other, I'm not sure. It's doable, but I don't see why the guys who haven't got a lot of money to throw around in a recession, which was what we're in, shouldn't be on the same page as the guys who've. That sounds like I'm not insulting the rich guys. On the contrary, I'm saying, do you think you might have a kind of responsibility? Do you feel you have some responsibility? Would you get behind us? Because see, when your wife walks up the stairs of that premiere, she's going to go, "You did the right thing there," because there's nothing like a big movie premiere to send your head into a different place, It's got to be doable. I mean, if we're as big as we say we are, and if we're as committed as we say we are, it'd be wonderful to think that ordinary Celtic fans, I hate that word, but you know what I mean, could be a big part of getting this made. But if the club don't believe in it, then the fans are going to have to believe in it.
The chances are they will though. This is the thing though, Peter, as you know. We're fans, and the people I speak to on the show about this, their eyes light up.
Yeah. I haven't said anything that's horribly critical of the club. I'm not very happy with them at the moment, to be honest, but, you know, I hope that Michael comes back, because I think Michael wants to do this. In fact, I'm damn sure he does. Let's see what happens.
When the fans club together, anything's possible.
I think that's right.
Without a doubt. And you're welcome to come back onto a Celtic State of Mind. And
Thank
talk
you.
about
It's been
this
a
again.
privilege to be here.
Thanks for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Helio.
Thanks again for joining us on a Celtic State of Mind. Join us next Friday at 6 o'clock for This is Acsom.